communication. An initial analysis of my relationships with others has thus led me to this result. The other asks me for nothing, and he is not a void that I would have to fill. I can discover no ready-made justification of myself in him, and yet each of my actions, by falling into the world, creates a new situation for him. I must assume these actions. I want certain situations, and I reject others. But why is it, then, that they do not appear to me as indifferent, that I can choose between them? In what way do they concern me? What is my true relationship with the other? We must first turn away from the errors of false objectivity. The serious mind considers health, fortune, education, and comfort as indisputable goods whose worth is written in heaven. But he is duped by an illusion. Ready-made values whose hierarchy is imposed upon my decisions do not exist without me. What's good for a man is what he wants, as his own good. However, this will is not sufficient to define ours. Is it good that this man attains his own good? As we have seen, man himself is divided between his present and his future. We must often choose, and man is not alone in the world. What is good for different men differs. Working for some often means working against the others. One cannot stop at this tranquil solution, wanting the good for all men. We must define our own good. The error of Kantian ethics is to have claimed to make an abstraction of our own presence in the world. Therefore, it leads only to abstract formulas. The respect of the human person in general cannot suffice to guide us, because we are all dealing with separate and opposed individuals. The human person is complete, both in the victim and the executioner. Should we let the victim perish, or kill the executioner? We have already seen that, if I efface myself from the world, if I have the contradictory pretension of judging human situations without adopting any human point of view on them, they appear to me as incomparable among themselves, and I can want nothing. An attitude of contemplation never allows any preference. It delivers what is with indifference. There is preference only when the subject transcends the object. One prefers for an end, from a definite point of view. One prefers one fruit over another in order to eat it or paint it. But if one had nothing to do with it, the word preference loses all meaning. Do you prefer the ocean or the mountains? It should be understood as, do you prefer to live by the ocean or in the mountains? If one doesn't care about sewing or riding a bicycle, one cannot choose between a bicycle and a sewing machine. A past moment can appear as better or worse to me to the extent that I transcend it with my own project. If I want the blossoming of culture, I prefer the Renaissance to the Middle Ages, and I consider it as a progression toward my end. But I can speak of progress only in relation to a goal that I have fixed. If I am transported outside of all situations, any given seems equally indifferent to me. So it is impossible for me to choose between the diverse moments of history. They appear as givens to me, identical in that they all represent the fixed momentum of a transcendence, and radically heterogeneous in the singular facticity of their existence. One can establish a hierarchy neither in the heart of identity nor in absolute separation. Spinoza rightly said that one cannot compare the perfection of horses with that of dogs. How does one decide what is worth the most in itself? The life of a cathedral builder or that of a pilot? And if we consider the human essence that is common to them, it is complete in each of them. In True Story, Montesquieu tells that one day a genie offered a poor man his choice of becoming a king, a rich landowner, or an opulent merchant whose happiness he had so often envied. The poor man hesitated, and in the end could not reconcile himself to any exchange. He remained himself. Each man is apt to envy the fate of another, Montesquieu concludes, but no one would accept to be the other. And in fact, I envy the situation of the other, if it appears to me as a point of departure that I myself would surpass, but the other's being, closed upon itself, fixed and separate from me, can be made the object of no desire. It is from the core of my life that I desire, prefer, and reject. Answering the question, how to choose, is possible because each one of us is truly at the core of his life. "I want the biggest piece," says the child, looking greedily at the cake that his mother has just cut up. "Why would it be yours rather than another's?" "Because it's me." The clever businessman knows how to cultivate this taste for privilege in his clients. "I'll let you have it for 20 francs, but only because it's you," he says to the flattered housewife. She readily believes him. How could I be just anyone? Other men exist only as objects. We alone grasp ourselves in our intimacy and our freedom as a subject. What is puerile in the child and the housewife is believing that their privilege exists in the eyes of others, but each person is only a subject for himself. But it is true that I am just anyone, only in the eyes of the others, and ethics cannot demand from me that I realize this foreign point of view. That would be to cease being me. It would be to cease being. I am. I am in situation before the other, and before the situations in which he finds himself. And that is exactly why I can prefer and desire. So we must now try to define what my situation is before others. Only then can we attempt to find a foundation for our actions. We have seen that it is only through the presence of man that what Jean-Paul Sartre calls negatites, i.e., voids, lacks, absences, seep into the world. Some men refuse to make use of this power. Everything around them is full. They see no place for anything else. Every novelty frightens them, and reforms must be forcibly imposed upon them. One did fine in the past without these inventions, they say. Others, on the contrary, are in a state of waiting. They hope and demand, but they never demand me, and yet I wish to be necessitated by them in the very singularity of my being. The book that I write does not fill a void, shaped in advance exactly like it. The book is, first, and once it is up to the reader to grasp its presence as the reverse of an absence. His freedom alone decides. How could one do without railroads or airplanes? How can one imagine French literature without Racine or philosophy without Kant? Beyond his present satisfaction, man retrospectively projects a need behind him, and indeed, now that it exists, the airplane responds to a need, but it is a need that it created by existing, or more exactly, that men freely created based on its existence. Human freedom must then carve out a place for this new plenitude that we caused to spring forth in the world. This place was not, and neither are we the ones who made it. We have only made the object that fills it up. Only the other can create a need for what we give him. Every appeal and every demand comes from his freedom. In order for the object that I founded to appear as a good, the other must make it into his own good, and then I would be justified for having created it. The other's freedom alone is capable of necessitating my being. My essential need is therefore to be faced with free men. My project loses all meaning, not if my death is announced, but if the end of the world is announced to me. The time of scorn is also that of despair. Thus it is not for others that each person transcends himself. One writes books and invents machines that were demanded nowhere. It is not for oneself either, because self exists only through the very project that throws it into the world. The fact of transcendence precedes all ends and all justification. But as soon as we are thrown into the world, we immediately wish to escape from the contingents and the gratuitousness of pure presence. We need others in order for our existence to become founded and necessary. It is not a matter of making recognized in us the pure abstract form of the self, as Hegel believes. I intended to save my being in the world, such as it is realized in my actions, my works, my life. Only through these objects that I make exist in the world can I communicate with others. If I make nothing exist, there is neither communication nor justification. But many men fool themselves here. We have seen that, out of irresponsibility or laziness, man often claims to find his being where he has not engaged it, and declares objects that he has not founded as his. He demands the other's approval for these foreign things, and he tries his best to believe that it's really he who benefits from it. In such a case, a man is accused of stupid vanity when, for example, he boasts about his ancestors, his fortune, or his good looks. In an even more puerile way, the jay adorns himself in peacock feathers, and the handsome Christian borrows Cyrano's voice under Roxane's balcony. But in the end, it is Cyrano whom Roxane loves. If we really cared about ourselves, we would refuse to let ourselves be loved or admired for the wrong reasons. That is to say, through goods that are not our own. Thus, some women want to be loved just as they are, and some men, incognito. The conceited man seems to imagine that others possess being, and that one can capture this precious wealth by surprise, but others can only clothe with the necessary dimension. What I do in order to make myself be, I must do something first. In this sense, one is right to say that whoever seeks himself will lose himself, and that it is in losing himself that he finds himself. If I seek myself in the eyes of others before I have fashioned myself, I am nothing. I take on a shape and an existence only if I first throw myself into the world by loving, by doing, and my being enters into communication with others only through those objects in which it is engaged. I must resign myself to never being entirely saved. There are endeavors that extend over an entire life, others are limited to an instant, but none expresses the totality of my being, since this totality is not. We are often fooled by a mirage. If, for example, I have written 2 verses that are admired, I readily believe that I am necessitated, even in my way of eating and sleeping, because my self is dispersed and unified at the same time. It is like the manna of the primitive man, entirely whole in each point. And as the primitive man thinks that if one possesses a single hair of his, one possesses his entire manna, we imagine that the praise given to one of our actions justifies our entire being. This is why we worry about being named. The name is my total presence, magically assembled into the object. But, in truth, our actions are separate, and we exist for others only insofar as we are present in our actions, and therefore in our separation. If first I must know what I communicate, it is no less important for me to know with whom I can and want to communicate. Looking for just any approval is another one of the weaknesses of vanity, as when Mr. de Montalent demands praise from critics whom he claims to scorn, and asks for the admiration of a public that he judges to be imbecilic. Truly, in order for the other to possess this power of making the object that I founded necessary, I must not be able to transcend him in turn. As soon as the other appears to me as limited or finite, the place that he creates for me on earth is as contingent and useless as himself. He needs me, but what need is there for him? How could this unjustified existence justify me? The coquette looks at her suitor with disgust. If her beauty is useless in the depths of her mirror, isn't it also useless in the depths of his eyes? Many women give up their lovers on the advice of their concierges, because the lover is only a man. The concierge is the voice of the public, that mysterious they that exists, and yet extends to infinity. A writer looks up with satisfaction when someone tells him, "They admire you." But as soon as he knows the name of his admirers, he is disappointed. Usually, the blame or the esteem of those close to us hardly touches us. We know their motives too well. They are facts that we can predict and transcend. Parents may be irritated to see their son give their lost prestige to a friend. The friend is a stranger whom the child does not transcend, while his parents have become fixed as objects in his eyes. In this way, the man who suffers from an inferiority complex will not let himself be reassured by any approval. The one who approves of him is only a single individual. He transcends him toward that innumerable, mysterious stranger in whose eyes he feels inadequate. Inversely, a man can always believe himself to be an unappreciated genius. Those who condemn him are only finite individuals, whose judgment he challenges in order to appeal to an enlightened, impartial, and free posterity. For I must have a freedom facing me. Freedom is the only reality that I cannot transcend. How can one surpass what is constantly surpassing itself? If a being appears to me as pure freedom, if he is capable of founding himself entirely by himself, he can also justify what I have founded by taking it on as his own. Such a being would be God. The magic of love, fear, admiration, and respect can change a man into God. The humble adorer is nothing but an object, and his idol is not an object before anyone. Toward whom could one transcend this pure and sovereign freedom? There is nothing beyond it. But if suddenly other freedoms are revealed to me, the fascination dissipates. I remember the shock I felt as a 13-year-old when a friend whom I admired violently contradicted an opinion of my father's. She judged my father. My father judged her in return. I could therefore appeal to my father against my friend, to my friend against my father. In this going back and forth, the absolute slipped away. I could no longer rely on anyone. My dismay lasted a long time. Whom should I care about pleasing? I am dealing not with one freedom, but with several freedoms. And precisely because they are free, they do not agree among themselves. Kantian ethics enjoins me to seek the support of all of humanity, but we have seen that there exists no heaven where the reconciliation of human judgments is accomplished. If certain works are hardly discussed anymore, it's because they have ceased to move us. They have become museum objects or relics. But one must not believe that they are justified simply because they are written down in history. Certainly without Sophocles or Malherbe, literature would not have been what it is, but that confers no necessity upon their works, because literature need not be what it is. It is, that's all. Here one finds the point of view of the universal that allows neither praise nor blame, since no void within it could even be supposed. Success appears only through a definite project that posits an end and carves out a retrospective appeal behind it. The dilettante who claims to love everything loves nothing. In order to be pleased about the existence of Rimbaud or Cézanne, one must prefer a certain poetry and a certain way of painting above all others. In order to be pleased about the existence of Rimbaud or Cézanne, one must prefer a certain poetry and a certain way of painting above all others. An object is grasped as having needed to be what it has been only if a singular choice flows back from the future toward it. This very reality that we throw into the world will be saved only if others found a future that envelops it by surpassing it, and only if new objects choose it in the past for the future. We cannot, therefore, be satisfied with a simple verbal approval. Only the conceited man is content with that, because he is only looking for the hollow appearance of being. But a more demanding man knows that words cannot suffice to necessitate the object that he has founded. He asks that a real place be reserved for him on earth. It is not enough that others listen to my tale. The listener must wait hungrily for my words. A woman quickly tires of an indifferent admiration. She wants to be loved, because love alone will create an essential need of her. The writer does not only want to be read, he wants to have influence. He wants to be imitated and pondered. The inventor asks that the tool he invented be used, but human projects are separate and may even fight against each other. To me, my being appears condemned to remain forever divided. A loyal ally is also a traitor, and a venerable wise man a corrupter. No man is a hero to his valet. I can laugh at the hero with the valet, but the hero and his friend will laugh at me. If I laugh at the valet, he will laugh at me at the same time as at the hero. However, if I laugh at everyone, I end up alone in the world, and everyone will laugh at me. The most convenient solution would be to challenge the judgments that bother me by considering the men who pass them as simple objects, denying them their freedom. They are barbarians, slaves, thought the decadent Romans, in seeing themselves cursed by the men working and suffering for them. He's a Negro, thought the planter of Virginia. And by rigid taboos, these parasitic societies try their best to defend the masters against the consciousnesses of the creatures whom they are exploiting. They must not be recognized as men. It is told that some white women used to get undressed in front of Indo-Chinese servant boys with indifference. Those yellow people were not men. But then the parasite ignores the human character of the objects that he uses. He lives in the midst of a foreign nature, among inert things, crushed by the enormous weight of things and subjected to a mysterious fate. In the tools, the machines, the houses, and the bread he eats, he does not recognize the mark of any freedom. Only the matter remains, and to the extent that he depends on matter, he also is only matter and passivity. In suppressing man's empire over things, he makes himself a thing among things, and he gains nothing in this metamorphosis. If we assume that, for security reasons, one administered to the servants a magic potion that transforms them into beasts, no reconciliation would be thus realized between men. Faced with this new animal species, the masters would still constitute a divided humanity. The parasite becomes human again only in turning toward his peers, and he then finds himself in danger before their freedoms. And besides, man is not free to treat other men as things, as he likes. In spite of taboos, prejudices, and his willful blindness, the master knows that he must speak to the slave. One speaks only to men. Language is an appeal to the other's freedom, since the sign is only a sign through the consciousness that grasps it again. He feels the look of the slave. As soon as he is looked at, he is the one who is object. He is a tyrant who is cruel or timid, resolute or hesitant. If he tries to transcend that transcendence, thinking, "Those are the thoughts of a slave," he knows that the slave also transcends that thought. And in the struggle that unfolds here, the slave's freedom is recognized by the very defense that the master puts up. All men are free, and as soon as we deal with them, we experience their freedom. If we want to disregard those dangerous freedoms, we must turn away from men. But then our being draws back and loses itself. Our being realizes itself only by choosing to be in danger in the world, in danger before the foreign and divided freedoms that take hold of it. However, we have a recourse against these freedoms, not stupid blindness, but struggle, because we can in turn transcend the actions by which they transcend us. Who will be my witness? Wonders the pilot in Saint Exupéry's Flight to Arras, who is sent on a dangerous mission at the moment of defeat. He challenges all testimonies. He himself witnesses others' cowardice and abandonment. I don't wish to be recognized by just anyone, because in communication with others, we look for the completion of the project in which our freedom is engaged, and therefore others must project me toward a future that I recognize as mine. For me, it would be a bitter failure if my action were perpetuated by becoming useful to my adversaries. The project by which others confer necessity upon me must also be my project. There are blames and hatreds that I joyfully accept. The revolutionary who combats the conservative's project wishes to appear as a hostile force to him. In her memoirs, Gertrude Stein tells that Fernand Picasso was happy with a hat only if she heard bricklayers and workmen exclaim at length when they saw her, because for her, elegance was defined as a challenge to plain good sense. If we struggle against a project, we choose to appear as an obstacle before it. There are projects that simply do not concern us. We consider the judgments where they are expressed with indifference. If, for example, it is a question of appreciating a poem, a banker is not competent, and the banker would smile at the poet's advice. It may be that my disdain envelops not one particular competence, but an entire man. It is the global project of his being that we reject and combat. So disdain becomes contempt. I am indifferent to any opinion of those whom I despise. I didn't ask you for your opinion, one says in contempt, and even, I am not speaking to you. For any speech, any expression is an appeal. True contempt is silence. It takes away even the taste for contradiction and for outrage. In the case of outrage, we ask that the other prove that his project is separate from ours. We want to become a ridiculous or hateful object for him. Thus there will no longer be complicity between us. But this is leaving him the initiative and consenting out of defiance to make ourselves into a thing. It is up to us to assert calmly that we are separating ourselves from him, that we are transcending him, and that he is but an object before us. It would be convenient to be able to use contempt as a weapon. One often tries hard to do this. A child or a young man, for example, who is esteemed by those around him, chooses not to confront a foreign judgment face to face. He confines himself to his sphere, and, in order to run no risk, disarms the rest of the world's opinion in advance. He goes through life with a sure step. Whoever condemns him condemns themselves, but in doing this, he denies his freedom. To be free is to throw oneself into the world without weighing the consequences or stakes. It is to define any stake or any step oneself. The overly prudent man, on the contrary, must take care to not found any project other than that which enhances the prestige of the people who enhance his prestige. This timid vanity is the opposite of true pride. It also happens that a man who at first meets only with failure and disdain around him defends himself with repudiation. He wanted to be an athlete. He fails. So he begins to scorn athletes and sports. He esteems only bankers or soldiers now. But in thus renouncing his project, he betrays himself. And besides, one cannot at will cause contempt or esteem to be born within oneself. It is through the same project that, by defining the objects I found, I define myself, and the public to whom my appeal is addressed. To love books, admire writers, and want to write, these were one and the same project for me in my childhood. Once the global choice has been posed, we can partially contradict it only through blindness and bad faith carries doubt and uneasiness along with it. That is why so many conceited men are so unhappy with themselves. A fool always finds a greater fool who admires him, but he cannot at will hide from himself the fact that that fool is a fool, nor can he take foolishness for a virtue whenever it suits him. Freedom commands, and does not obey. In vain does one try to deny or force it. If sports are truly my project, I still prefer being an unsuccessful athlete rather than being an honored, obese man. This is why one cannot so easily triumph, even interiorly, over a hated rival. If I want to be courageous, skillful, and intelligent, I cannot scorn the courage, skill, or intelligence in the other. The attitude of those who love only those who love them, and indiscriminately scorn all those who scorn them, is rightly seen as a weakness. One is rather suspicious that their love and their scorn are only a hollow appearance. Only by my free movement toward my being can I confirm in their being those from whom I expect a necessary foundation of my being. In order for men to be able to give me a place in the world, I must first make a world spring up around me, where men have their place. I must love, want, and do. My action itself must define the public to which I propose it. The architect loves to build. He builds an edifice that will remain standing for centuries. He appeals to a long posterity. An actor, a dancer, appeal only to their contemporaries. If I perfect an airplane motor, my invention is of interest to millions of men. If it is a matter of getting approval for my daily actions or passing words, I address myself only to those who are close to me. I can concretely appeal only to the men who exist for me, and they exist for me if I have created ties with them or if I have made them into my neighbors. They exist as allies or as enemies, according to whether my project agrees with theirs or contradicts it. But how would I not assume this very contradiction, since I am the one who makes it exist? By making myself, such as I make myself.